How's everybody doing today? So, I figured I'd do something slightly different than my normal. I've got a top 10 for you. Now, this does not mean that it is the top 10 in my opinion. It's just a top 10 as far as I'm concerned. My opinions on top 10 swords. This website that I'm using as a reference, so it's not where I'm getting my opinion from or anything, is fun.com. Um, Home blog 50 epic fictional swords. This was by Wyatt Edwards, published in 2019. I found this just to kind of help me as a visual aid to present to you guys, give a little bit of more backstory on some of these swords. So let's get into it. First that I've got on my list is, well, I'm going to leave out the raised blue lightsaber part, but it's definitely Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker's blue lightsaber. And we know that that's the one that he used in Episode 3, and that was lost to him, of course. Obi-Wan was the one that took it, and that's how Luke gets it. And, as far as good Star Wars goes, that's about the end of it. Um, but that's just the first up on my list. It doesn't show it on this list, but along with that, in the same group, is also Darth Maul's saber staff. And it is a saber staff, not a double-ended lightsaber. There's a difference. Double-ended lightsabers are thinner and a little bit longer, whereas a saber staff has that thicker um, hilt section, I guess you could say, which makes it more like a baseball bat if he's only wielding one side. Then you've also got Mace's purple lightsaber. Can't go without saying that. And of course, Luke's green lightsaber that he built himself, which I do believe it is on this list. And of course, we've got Darth Vader's saber as well. Now, dislike, I highly dislike the current kyber crystal lore where Sith have to bleed a kyber crystal. That makes it far too much like they are all sentient beings. There was was it the Order of the Crystal Knights or something like that in Legends, which is sentient uh, crystals, and they were able to get inside droid bodies and control them, but that's not all of them. It's only some of them. Well, in here, the new lore, it kind of makes it like all kyber crystals are sentient, not simply through the force. They bleed a kyber crystal by imbuing them with anger and pain. This process turns the crystal red, which explains why the lightsabers of Sith lords, like Darth Vader, are colored as they are. In reality, the Sith homeworld of Korriban, and I can't remember which, but there's another planet where the Sith were also on for a very long time. But Korriban itself actually had a very, very large deposit of red kyber crystals. So that's where the Sith would get their crystals from. It makes sense. They didn't have to go out searching for them. It wasn't a ritual like the Jedi. Now the Jedi went on a ritual, almost like a pilgrimage, in order to get theirs. And so that's kind of how they got theirs and why some of them have different colors, which also leads into Mace's being purple. Um, yes, the purple was added from the movie, but from a lore perspective, it also makes sense. So moving on, I'm going to go to it's Narsil and Andwil. Just got there you go, Anduril, excuse me. So Anduril is the reforged weapon. Um, Now Narsil was the original one. Of course, that's the one that Isildur's father had and was broken by Sauron, which they show quite well in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. And of course, Isildur is the one who cut the finger along with the One Ring off of Sauron's hand. And then if you've seen the movies instead of just read the books, you know that that Aragorn is given it right before the journey through the Paths of the Dead. Well, in the actual books, Aragorn carries Andúril from Rivendell at the very start of the quest. So I do think that for theatrics, though, giving it to him before the Paths of the Dead was actually really well done. But yeah, Narsil reforged into Andúril is a very powerful weapon as far as what's called a mundane weapon. It's not specifically magical in and of itself beyond what the elves imbue into it. Um, yeah, moving on. Um, Here we go. Ashbringer. Well, I have Ashbringer and Frostmourne are kind of on the same level for me, so I've got these both grouped into two thing or into grouped into one category because they're both WoW weapons. So the Ashbringer, if you've played uh, in the Caverns of Time, you've gone through the old lore. There's a guy named Alexis Alexandros, excuse me, Mograine, also known as the Ashbringer, who named his sword Ashbringer. Well, when you go through lore, you find out that it was I believe it was a chunk of solid light. Is basically what they found, and there were a bunch of paladins around from the Silver Hand that actually together they forged it into a sword, and Mograine was the one who ended up having it as his personal one. They called it the Ashbringer because it was supposed to bring the dead, turn the dead to ash with the power of the light. As you can see right here, the um, the light crystal that's on there. Um, and of course, in the lore, the sword is rumored to exist in World of Warcraft's code for years, and eventually resurface as a corrupted weapon. A true version of the artifact weapon became the artifact weapon of the Ret Paladins in the Legion expansion, which it wasn't bad. It was really interesting seeing people run around with Ashbringer, though. Like, there was only one. I don't know why they did that. But again, moving on. We have the next up that I have on my list is the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda, specifically from the Ocarina of Time. Here we are. Number two is the personal weapon of Link in the Legend of Zelda franchise, where it is known as the Blade of Evil's Bane, the sword that seals the darkness, and a variety of other awesome names. It first appeared in A Link to the Past, a magical sword. In the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, was arguably a different weapon, and often must be found after a series of quests or tests. And I think Ocarina of Time did it really well as far as when you finally get to that point and then your character grabs hold of it, they get time locked or stasis by the sages of time. That way the character can grow up to be an actual formidable force against um, Ganon. Well, Ganondorf, but you know his true form is Ganon. So as far as power goes, the Master Sword is supposed to be, I believe, it's supposed to be unbreakable. It can reflect magic attacks as you do in the game itself. Um, it can be imbued with light, I believe, um, like the light arrows that you use on Ganon, if you have them. um, but it can also be imbued with that same kind of light in the lore to deal even more damage to creatures of evil. Next on my list is Durandal, which is also right here. So, and this is true, there's probably mythical sword on the list, Durandal. Now, Durandal, part of the reason why I chose Durandal is number one, it is an actual mythological sword, like from the real world. Um, as you can see, it's from the epic poem La Chanson de Roland. And forgive me, I don't speak French, so if I said that wrong, I apologize. But translated into the Song of Roland. Um, So it's a mythical sword, but it's also been used in a lot of specifically anime. I don't know if it's been used quite a bit in Western comics or anything else. I do believe Durandal shows up in the Marvel comics. But correct me if I'm wrong. I was pretty sure it did. Um, so that's part of the reason why I showed it. It's supposed to have powers depending on where it comes from. As you can see right here, the sword contained all sorts of saintly relics, imbuing it with both magical and religious significance. Roland himself used the sword at the battle, excuse me, at the battle of, I believe that's pronounced Roncesvalles. Roncesvalles Pass was likely based on a real life event. Now I did look it up. There actually is a Roncesvalles Pass, so it'd be very interesting for those historians or history buffs. If you could tell me, you know, if there was an actual battle there or what. Um, but about Roland and his sword, they may have existed, but all the details are now romanticized legends. So that makes sense. Like I said, it's supposed to be your first, probably mythological sword on this list, and its origins are an angel gave the sword to Charlemagne, who in turn gave it to Roland. So a very interesting I wouldn't say reality grounded story, but definitely something from the real world rather than just perfectly made up, out of nowhere. Next, we have Soul Edge and Soul Calibur. I just put them at the same um, in the same group because they're from the same universe. I can find it on this list. I know it's on here. Oh well. So Soul Edge and Soul Calibur. Let's see if it's on this one. These are famous fantasy swords. There we go. Okay. So, as this person notes, a thorough explanation on the convoluted history of Soul Edge and Soul Calibur, the twin blades of Namco's weapon-based fighting franchise, would require a PowerPoint presentation complete with timelines and flowcharts. So that's absolutely true. Um, what it boils down to is Soul Edge is evil and Soul Calibur is kind of good. And sometimes they're bonded together to make Soul Embrace. I haven't played the games enough to get to that stage. I played Soul Calibur 2, and I'm trying to remember, but I don't think Soul Embrace was the thing you got in there. I could be wrong, because I'm pretty sure I beat the game. But suffice to say, they are a major part of the storyline for Soul Edge and Soul Calibur video games and appear in most of the game's iconography, though their design is awfully different, vastly different from game to game. And that's true. A lot of that comes from it takes the form of whoever wields it. It takes the form of them best. Soul Edge has generally been in the care of I can't remember the evil character's name. Oh, and this website before I go on that I'm getting this from is the robot's voice. Um, but yeah, Siegfried. Siegfried is the good person who typically has soul edge, um, but because he's corrupted, and I can't remember what evil person he turns into, but he's normally one of the bad guys that you play in the game, play against. Excuse me. You can play him as well. Um, I mean, it's basically a great sword from Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter might have gotten, you know, uh, inspiration from the game, or vice versa, or they just both like great swords. So moving on, we now have the Buster Sword. That also should be on this list, but oh my goodness. Of course not. All right, let me go back to the robot voice one. See if Buster Sword is on here. Hey, there we go. This is Cloud's iconic weapon. Can't really see it in here, at least what it looks like. However, anybody who has played the Final Fantasy VII games, the old or the remake, or if you play, uh, my goodness, Super Smash Brothers, either 4 or Ultimate, you can play Cloud, and he, of course, has the Buster Sword. Now, the funny thing is like this person says, the Buster Sword is wielded by the main protagonist, but it is quickly superseded in the game by better swords. However, it's used in all the cutscenes and marketing art, things like that, so it's become iconic. It is basically a massive kitchen knife, which is true, and that makes it memorable because it's got a simple design. They say here, uniquely minimalist. Ridiculous? Yes. Iconic? Definitely. It generally appears whenever Cloud Strife does, including his Final Fantasy side story appearances and in Kingdom Hearts. Um, Kingdom Hearts was not really something I got into, so I didn't get that far. I had no idea. I knew Cloud was in there, and I kind of assumed he was going to be in there as far as with the Buster Sword, but I just didn't play it. Next, we have the Vorpal Sword. Come on. Here we go. The funny thing is the Vorpal Sword comes from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, and what Alice found there, which is the sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Alice read a nonsense poem named Jabberwocky. As a nonsense poem, it contained a great number of made up words, including a Vorpal sword and a Vorpal blade that killed a creature named the Jabberwock. Carroll didn't define or describe the Vorpal sword slash blade, only that it sounded like a snickerstack, and it was capable of beheading a foe. To be fair, can't most swords? They have a decent point there. The sword found its way into Dungeons and Dragons rules, where it excels at decapitating enemies. Now, I do like the Vorpal sword for Dungeons and Dragons. It does have I believe it deals X amount of damage or whatever the rules are, but yeah, it says it will automatically behead certain enemies. Multi-headed enemies doesn't count, um, and huge enemies like you can't just automatically behead a dragon, things like that. So it's got some rules on there as far as that goes. But yeah, the Vorpal sword itself is very iconic. It's been in a bunch of systems that I've played, and I believe also in a bunch of anime as well. So it's definitely popular as far as pop culture goes. Um, so yeah, mostly you see the Vorpal sword. I don't really hear Vorpal blade, but I digress. We have the power sword. Where are you? Like I said, I've used this for just a visual to help you guys see what I'm looking at instead of just speaking. Um, okay, so the power sword is from the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It says the Masters of the Universe toy line was released, a little bit of history here, in '82, introducing us to the hero He-Man and the villain Skeletor. Those two actually each included half of a power sword plus a mini comic about their going battles. The details don't really matter, only that He-Man and Skeletor wanted to obtain both halves because the power sword had all kinds of cool powers. It is called the Power Sword after all. The next year, the cartoon series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which would be 1983, debuted on television, and it was awesome. I loved watching this as a child. He-Man had the full power sword itself. Well, kind of. Prince Adam had the sword, and by saying, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power, he turns into He-Man. Then you've got the live action movie in '87, which I never saw, but it's Dolph Lundgren, and it looks a little cheesy because it's from the '80s, but it still looks pretty cool. And of course, got new toy lines in 1990, 2002, excuse me, and 2008, along with an accompanying television series in '90 and 2002. During that time, the Power Sword also gets called the Sword of Power and the Sword of Grayskull. This is true. You're going to have to actually look that up because sometimes you're looking for a specific design because the design does vary slightly. You'd have to look up Sword of Power or Sword of Grayskull to get that specific one. So just remember that it was a toy line first, and the cartoon series was meant to sell the toys. People don't realize that actually happened a lot, especially from the '80s and '90s. Transformers was another one. In fact, Star Wars started the movie started so the movie could sell the merchandise. As funny as that sounds, the merchandise came out the exact same time as the movie. That way, you would see the movie and then want to buy the toys because they make more profit, more return on investment by people buying the toys that accompany it. But the Power Sword itself, as far as its abilities go, it's supposed to be nigh indestructible. It actually draws power. It's from Castle Grayskull, which I believe the Power Sword also acts as a key to get into it anyway. The power and the Castle Grayskull kind of acts as a nexus for all the magical power, I believe, on the planet. I believe it's the whole planet. I don't think it's like the universe or anything. That's part of the reason why Skeletor wants to get the sword so he can get into Grayskull and take the power for himself. Which I believe in the newer series, Masters of the Universe or He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the one done by Kevin Smith, which it isn't great. Um, it's actually kind of terrible, but that's actually one of the things that happens, I believe, in the first episode, is that Skeletor is able to bust into Castle Grayskull. Um, so let's see. Then you have yeah, it's nigh indestructible. It can cut through pretty much anything. I believe it reflects magical attacks. Um, I think it absorbs them if he just kind of holds it there, but he does reflect them if, like Link, he slashes at them. He can either slash through them or reflect them. It's been a little while since I've seen the original show. The last one on here is, in my opinion, one of the most awesome ones. I love Thundercats, the original. I saw the remake that they did. It wasn't actually that bad, but the original Thundercats will always hold a special place in my heart. And the Sword of Omens is the coolest sword. It can change size from a dagger to a long sword. It can melt metal and stone, stun or electrocute enemies. Plus, its Eye of Power can release a powerful energy blast, heal and cure magical effects, fly through the air, and grant the ability to see over far distances. Now, within the series, its power is compared to that of Excalibur, and as the writer puts, we don't remember any of that happening in Le Morte d'Arthur. And of course, that would be the original story of Arthur, King Arthur, with Excalibur. And of course, over the time, Excalibur has been attributed a whole lot of magical abilities, things like that. But the Sword of Omens is also considered to be nigh indestructible. Um, I mean, anybody who's ever seen it, always, especially as a child, it's always an awesome thing to hear Lion-O go thunder, 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 Thundercats, ho, and the sword changes. And especially as he swishes, oh my goodness, slices through the air and says thunder, and of course it grows just a little bit, thunder. So I just, sorry, kind of geeking or fanboying over it, but the Sword of Omens is arguably from this entire list one of the most powerful weapons out of this top 50. And that includes, of course, the lightsaber, because the Sword of Omens is supposed to be indestructible. Can't really do anything against that. The Blazing Sword actually, the Blazing Sword is Voltron's sword, so I'm not sure if you can accurately compare the Sword of Omens to that. Um, Things like that. I do want to give special mention, however, to where is it on here? The Sunsword. It was right underneath. Now, the Sunsword is from Thundarr the Barbarian. If you've never seen that show, I recommend very highly that you go watch it. It's only 2 seasons, 21 episodes, but the Sunsword is almost like a lightsaber. Um, yeah, it's as it says right here, the main character, a barbarian named Thundarr, wielded the Sunsword, which is really just a hilt that can project a sword made of light. Sound familiar? Of course, that is like a lightsaber. Um, and if I remember correctly, it does have a hilt though, so or crossguard, excuse me. It's a hilt with a crossguard. Sadly, the show only aired for 2 seasons, although the Sunsword would find its way again into Dungeons and Dragons and also other fantasy and sci-fi media. And I believe the Sunsword is again a thing that manga also has caught up in multiple different shows having to do with weapons, things like that. Because thankfully, manga, Japan in general, they kind of pull things from different areas of the world, um, make it kind of cool. So yeah, there's my list of top 10. It'd be lightsabers, Narsil Anduril, Ashbringer Frostmourne, the Master Sword, Durandal, Soul Edge, Soul Calibur, the Buster Sword, Vorpal Sword, the Power Sword, the Sword of Omens. And then I have, of course, the Sun Sword as the honorable mention. So tell me what you guys think in the comments below, and I hope you like the video. Thank you.